Hello and welcome to this tutorial. I've been doing experiments in Octane Render to make landscapes lately, so here's a tutorial to do just that. The first part will cover the terrain creation with World Creator 2, including the creation of the distribution maps for Octane Scatter. The second part will show you the setup of your terrain in Octane Render for Cinema 4D. You can skip the first part if you do not want to try World Creator 2 or to invest in it. I will provide you the necessary files to create the terrain. Let us start by creating a new project. In the latest versions of World Creator 2, you now have project folders. So you name your file and it creates a full folder full of the necessary elements for your terrain. This will prove quite handy as you will see. So we'll just modify the base terrain and create this shape, aiming to put the camera in the lower right hand part of the terrain and to see it fully in Octane Render. Now let's add just a few filters. The first one being cratered cliffs to create a series of cliffs, quite sharp but interesting anyway. We'll just add another filter called canyon, which makes the terrain quite interesting with lots of little details, including near the cliffs. And we'll add a third one, an erosion fluvial. So in case you haven't seen what the erosion causes, you can uncheck this little mark and you'll see it creates nice little lines everywhere where the water has taken some of the stones away. This looks already quite good. So here's the view we aim at having in our final image, with all these details in the first area and the terrain at the back. Maybe we'll get some of the parts here a bit higher in order to hide the back. So to do this, we'll go back to the base terrain and hit custom base shape and edit the shape. Custom base shape is already set from another experiment I did, so that should be fine. Small valleys. And let's hit done edit shape. So this is the final shape of our terrain. I don't think we'll modify it too much. What we will do though is increase its size. Currently it's a 2K terrain. We'll push it to 4K. This version of World Creator, I believe, supports terrain up to 16K, but you need a good video board in order to take full advantage of it. It will work with a bare terrain, but if you add textures and objects, it's a bit too taxing, and you'll soon hear your video board fan increasing its speed. So here's the terrain. We will export the 8 map, so you need to export it in TIFF 16-bit. and we'll export it in a flat mountain tutorial in the same directory. Now we will create a series of areas in order to drive the different materials and to set the areas where we want our stones. Let's add the first area. Let's make it cover the whole terrain. Increase its size to 2K, and we'll set this area to fit the filter, the canyon filter. So this should cover all the rough areas of the map of the terrain. If we increase the level step, it will constrain the map to the exact areas where the terrain is a bit more rough. Okay, so let's call this canyons. I will create another map, another area for the cratered cliffs. So same process. We do not need to save the areas because they will be saved with the project file. So filter, cratered cliffs. Normally it looks quite similar to the canyon distribution, but it takes the full cliffs, so we will maybe test both of them to see which one fits us best. So cratered cliffs. Naming these areas will enable us to find the files more easily afterwards. Oops. So let's say it, and let's create a third area called erosion. It's already okay, and we'll check. So the base version of erosion is very rough with very few details. If we push it to level step 8, it's already way better. As I told you, you do not need to save this. We might want our stones to fit this distribution, but I'll show you another way to control the distribution of stones a bit more accurately. This way of distributing stones is a bit limiting because we'll have very few of them outside the erosion, the eroded areas, and they will be very small, as we will see later on. So in order to have a distribution of stones, we will add an object layer, call it stones. We don't need actually to rename it, but and we'll add some rocks. The first one, for instance. It doesn't actually matter which rock you choose. So the rocks are distributed on all the terrain except on steep slopes at first. What I want is rocks only on the bottom part of the terrain, so I reduce the 8 to 150, or maybe a bit more less, 100 meters. I'm not sure it changes anything. 0, no, 50, 15, yeah, 25. Yeah, 25 should fit, so we will only have rocks in this lower part of the terrain. We can preview the distribution with the heat map here. So actually, it's quite linear at the moment. We will add rocks to slopes from 10 to 30. So if we preview the distribution, it's far less linear, and the rock distribution fits a bit the slopes. You can see that the rocks appear at the bottom of the steepest slopes. We will add a bit of variation to this in order to get more small rocks at the top of the cliffs. It doesn't seem to change a lot, but and let's preview with a higher probability and less object distance. We'll have more rocks, so it should look a bit like this. Octane Render handles clumping a little better than it is handled here. So this suits me. Maybe we'll add a bit of 8th smoothness. 50 is too much. Let's try 20. Still a bit too much. I want a few rocks to appear above the 8 I have set, but not too many of them. Yeah, that might do the trick, and then maybe reduce the 8 here. So this is the distribution we want, and we'll use this. We don't want rocks at the bottom, at the back of the terrain, because they will be difficult to see. But if you plan to make an animation, you will need them, so you can set the 8th to the full 8th of the terrain. Now we need to save this distribution, so we click Save Heat Map. And this will save the distribution map. We'll need to edit it a bit later, so I'll show you how. Let's save the project, and this will save all the areas. It does not save the 8th map. You still need to export it. It does not save the heat maps. You need to export them, but it will save our areas. There's no save progress currently, but once this disappears, we can check which files have been created. So in 2D you have areas, details, ground. Only areas will be active. So our 2 blend maps, canyons, cratered cliffs, and erosion. So 3 blend maps. And then we have the 8 map and the heat map. As you can see, the heat map is currently red on black. This is not the right thing, and it will not work with the Octane Render, so we'll need to rework this in Photoshop. So we need to have white on black. It will work better, so let's switch to grayscale, and then let's change the levels in order to have sharper black to white transitions, and then save. We'll save it as a TIFF to distinguish it from the PNG file. Can now close Photoshop. We will also close World Creator because it makes the video board work more, so we'll need the full power for Octane Render. And let's go to Cinema 4D. This is not my normal setup. I usually work on 2 screens, but I've included everything on 1 screen in order for you to see. So we'll create a plane, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. Let's also create a daylight. Currently, as you can see, there's not much to see, but we have our plane and the daylight fitting the time of day. So we'll first try the 8 map, and to do so create a mixed material. We'll see afterwards why I create a mixed material. So I'm using the node editor because I find it more handy. let's first add the displacement and set it up. So our displacement is this map. I'm using drag and drop a lot with Octane Render. It's easier with 2 screens, but it still works with 1. So here's the 8 map, and we'll add a displacement to the map. Currently nothing happens because we have not yet applied the material to the terrain, and also the displacement is very small, so we'll increase it to 250 meters, and as our map is a 4K map, we'll add 4K details to it. Let's close this and apply the mixed material to our terrain. So what has changed is that the terrain is now above our head because it's quite high. So let's try to find it back. I'm clicking O to see it, and here is the displacement with the full terrain, and you can see that there are quite a few problems on the sides with these artifacts. So we will solve this by editing the material, the displacement material. Again, in the node editor, we'll need to add a transform node to this image texture and resize it. We'll resize it to until we find that we can make the artifacts disappear. So generally 1.001, well, this one does not exactly work because there are still artifacts here, so let's try one. You should only use very low values, because otherwise the distribution maps will not work on the terrain. Let's also change the time of day, because it's a bit too late and we won't see it correctly. Okay. So in order to see all the details, we'll just changing it a bit. So here is the terrain in its full details. I think the camera view was here. One thing you want to pay attention to is the sharpness of the terrain. If you have too many small sharp ridges, it may break the displacement in Octane Render. So let's find a view that will be able to use. So now we want to create the texture distribution on the terrain. We have the distribution maps, and now we need to visualize accurately how the maps will be put on the terrain. So we have distribution maps for the cliffs, for the erosion, and we'll create a map for the base terrain. So that's 3 maps. 3 maps, but Octane Render only allows mixing 2 materials, unless I'm mistaken. I may not be know the things well enough. In World Creator you have a layer system, which is quite handy, but we'll need to mix maps in Octane Render. So the first mix will not be enough, so we'll create a second mix material and call it ground. The first mix material we'll call terrain. This will be for the full terrain. Now let's create the 3 maps we need, like Octane materials. So erosion, and we'll color it orange. Okay. Let's create another map and call it cliffs. Change its color to red. This is to better visualize the the different material as they are spread, and this one will be grass. Well, but it will not be exactly grass, but and grass will be green. Logical. So let's first try our ground material. We will not apply it straight to the terrain, but so again, node editor. What we need here is a distribution map to set the amount and two materials. So let's first set the materials. We'll handle the thing with we'll make the distribution between the cliffs. Oops. Sorry. The cliffs and the grass, and then we'll add the erosion on top of this. So to set the distribution, we need one of the maps we have created, which are in areas. Let's try with the canyon blend maps. So we're bringing it here and use it to set the amount of the mix. This should do the trick. So I'll close this, and then we'll select the whole terrain. The whole terrain is the mix between this mix, ground and erosion. So between ground and erosion. And yes, oops. And the amount needs to be set by this blend map, erosion map. It's getting a bit messy, but so actually I made a mistake because I both terrains, both colors are not the right ones. So I will set erosion and ground. What do we get? Let's have a look at the terrain we got. So we have the cliffs in red, actually the canyons, and I think we will switch for the cliffs because, as you can see, otherwise there will be grass on the cliffs, which is not what we want. We have the erosion in orange with the small areas of erosion, and we have grass or ground everywhere. So we need to use this to change this distribution map, because we have two distribution maps, and we'll use created cliffs and see what it changes. As you can see, it changes a bit the distribution, and we have a little more cliffs on the tops. Now it's time to switch to real maps, because this is only something that will enable us to preview our terrain. So we'll load image maps here. First, the grass. For the grass, I've selected ground needles, so the materials will be available for you to download. Well, they are already available for you to download on my website, which you will find in the links underneath the video. So we will select for each map a base color, a normal map, and a roughness map. These were generated with the bitmap to material software from pictures I took in a forest. So normal will go there, diffuse will go there, and roughness will go there. As you can see, it works quite well, except that the image map is only repeated once on the terrain. It's way too big, so we'll need to use a transform node in order to reduce its scale. So we'll apply it to the three maps and reduce the scale to 0.05. This should do the trick. Maybe one should be enough. So as you can see, it looks quite natural. The mixing between the materials will help us reduce the problems of tiling that we may see. Let's click on the cliffs, and for the cliffs I will select another material I've prepared, which is actually a material I used on I found on the seaside. So color, glossiness, normal, and then roughness, diffuse, normal. Again, same problem, we have this styling problem. It's less visible, but we need to fix it also. Transform, and let's also set the size to 0.2 maybe. I think it works quite well. The last material we need to fix is the erosion. For erosion, I think I had something called small metal debris. I think it's in the rocks, and no, it's not there. Sure, it's there. I can't find it. Gravel. It's easier to find on the website than on my hard disk. Earth, I think. Yeah. So I have this one. First map, second map, third map. This one is glossiness, but it won't change lots of things as it won't be seen from close. Again, transform, and change the size to 0.1. I think we have something already quite convincing, with even some small rocks appearing here and there. This is quite good. Now we'll do what thing that has that I had a little trouble doing first. It is using Octane Scatter to put some rocks. The problem was that the rocks didn't align to the terrain first, so I had to search a bit. One thing is that you can't preview in the C4D preview panel anything, because the displacement is entirely handled by Octane Render. If you want to see the wireframe, here it is. You have all your tiles that are displaced, regardless of the number of tiles there are. I'm currently staying in direct lighting to reduce the update time. So let's add our rocks. So first add an Octane Scatter object, and here we will adjust the distribution. We'll set it to surface and select the plane as a surface. Okay, so you can't see it probably here, but there are already small dots here and there, so these are the elements that will be scattered. I have already prepared a rock that will scatter. It's called terrestrial rock. It's based on the same texture than the one we are using for the cliffs. So let's put our rocks in the Octane Scatter. The first thing you can see that is that nothing appears on the preview. This is because all the rocks are distributed on the non-displaced surface of the plane, so they are all flat on the flat plane. We need to add the displacement information in the position parameter of the rocks. So let's go and find our 8th map and add it there. Okay, and also set the displacement to the same size. So now it appears that the little rocks have been moved according to the terrain, but they still do not appear. This is a little trick here. You need to open the shader and then set the color profile to linear, and then your rocks appear. So actually at the moment my rocks are quite big, but I will set their distribution and scale with the scale parameter. This sets the distribution and scale. The distribution map we have created will set both of them. It will set the opacity, will tell the scatter object where rocks should appear and what size they should have. So if it's a lighter gray, it will be a smaller size. Let's go and find the shader. You remember that we have created this heat map, so let's open it. And now the rocks only appear where they should in the heat map. They look very similar because there are only 2 different rocks here. So let's us add a bit of randomness with an effector, a random effector. So let us associate the random effector to our octane scatter, and then modify the parameters. So we do not really want the position to change. What we need is maybe the rotation, which we can change entirely. So now the rocks look a bit different from one another. And what we will change also is the scale. Make it uniform, make it absolute, and as the rocks are a bit too big to my taste, I will set it to minus 0.5 or maybe even -1. Now we'd like more rocks, so we'll go to the distribution parameter of octane scatter and add some more. That's still too big. Let's go back to the random and maybe, well, no, this time I will reduce their size directly in the scale parameter. We'll reduce it by 0.3. That should do the trick. Maybe add twice the number of rocks, and I think this is a bit more convincing. So you can use this technique to create to add more scatter objects, create different scatter objects for grass or for trees, for instance. And you can use the terrain generation technique, especially with World Creator, to create convincing terrain such as this one. World Creator 2 has been launched recently from what I've seen, but new features should be added, especially with rivers and erosion cones that are not present in this version yet. So there's more to come, and you could imagine that erosion cones will be especially useful when distributing rocks on them. This is all for now. I'll show you another trick. As you probably have seen, to give a sense of scale in such a terrain, you can actually put some haze. You can use the Octane Render fog to do so, but its distribution will be linear, so you will have the same amount of haze everywhere. So there's another trick to do this, is to use the Z-depth. Here it is. The Z-depth by default is not really useful to do this. You can't use it because it's not set correctly. The Z-depth max is set to 5. Let's set it to 2000, and the Z-depth is now more informative. Let's try our W's. Yes, 1000 is quite interesting. So now we have an interesting value for Z-depth that we will save as a 16-bit PNG image. So flat mountain. Okay, let's also save our rendered view. I'll do this in a small scale so that you can see it more, that it is more fast. So flat mountain color, and let's open both of these files in Photoshop. So flat mountain tutorial is the color and the depth. So it opens two different files. Let's copy the Z-depth to a new channel in this image. Okay, let's add a new layer, which would be white with a little tint of grayish blue. This will be the color of our haze. We will add haze in Photoshop and handle its density with the Z-depth. So here we set the density. As you can see, it's entirely white because it's very contrasted. So we'll reduce the opacity until we find a good setting. So the more you go, the more opaque you set it, the more distant it will appear. I think this will be enough, and maybe we can even reduce the depth by setting it to maybe screen. I'm not sure it will change anything, but we could darken a bit the image. This image, darken it a bit before image adjustment. Oops, levels. We do not want the thing is that we'd like the foreground to be free of haze. So let's try again with this channel. Select option, get rid of the mask and apply it with the new channel. So normally we should have less haze in the foreground, a little more in the background. So this is the way to quickly add haze to an image in post-production without having to wait for Octane Render to render some fog and have the same amount of haze here and there. So this is the end of this tutorial. I hope it was informative. Do not hesitate to ask questions in the comments section of the video, and see you later for another one.